Time for Wine Talks with Paul K.
Fascinating story.
This is Robert Mondavi from the Michael Mondavi Winery.
I taste a lot of wine.
Having a conversation with Shark Tank, Kevin O'Leary.
Michael Silacci, Opus One Winery.
Incredible conversation with Dr. Mia Ruth.
No matter what, you're definitely going to feel better.
Sit back and grab a glass. It's Wine Talks with Paul K.
Welcome to Wine Talks with Paul K. And we are in studio today in beautiful Southern California in Monrovia, having a great day. Actually, it's raining today. About to have a conversation with Simone Kelly of the Seresin Winery in New Zealand. Introductions in just a second. Wine Talks, of course, available on iHeartRadio, Pandora, Spotify, wherever you hang out for podcasting. And now speaking, is it easy for you to say? Now sporting the rosé and sweet series of wines. Hey, have a listen to Katrina Fry. Incredible conversation about organic and biodynamic farming. We're going to talk about that today as well. But she is the first organic farm in California, as well as the first biodynamic farm growing grapes in California. Kind of like a throwback to like Woodstock or something, actually. It's a great conversation. Have a listen to that, but not why we're here. Here I have a conversation with Simone Kelly. He calls himself the GM of Seresin Winery. Welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Paul.
But you're the GM, you're the export sales manager, you do a lot of things there.
Yeah. Try
Like
and keep things, moving along. And I haven't been out of the country for about 3.5 years because we've been locked down pretty hard.
That was brutal, wasn't it?
Yeah. Oh, it was nice. It sort of forced you to slow down and it's not a bad place to be locked down.
Well, when you're the husband of the winemaker, that's a pretty good spot to be in. Is that job security when you have that?
Being a husband?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, well, I am one too. And my wife is the controller here, the real controller, not just the financial controller.
No, she's great.
Yeah, that's great.
Absolutely.
So, let's talk about the lockdown for a second. I have my IT person here, Chris. He's been with the company for 20-something years. He's all things IT, and his father passed during COVID, and he tried to go back.
Did he make it?
Well, he was. It was a huge task.
Yeah, it's like a lottery.
Yeah, and it was. But father dying wasn't on the list.
No, it was pretty brutal for a lot of people all around the world who wanted to try and get back. And there's only so many beds in the quarantine hotels. The hotels got converted into quarantine facilities, and a lot of people didn't get the chance to say goodbye.
Did it work? I mean, was that methodology did it work?
I guess if you look at the numbers of deaths, we were like one of the lowest numbers of
I suppose
deaths.
It did, huh?
Yeah, so in some respects from COVID, but a lot more social and business challenges thereafter.
Are they still reeling from sort of the bureaucratic overreach? I'm going to call it overreach.
I think the problem was, now we have a problem. We just don't have enough people in the country to do stuff to pick grapes, to serve food in restaurants. We just don't have enough people because the borders were closed for such a long time. And I think the Australian government have made things quite a bit more attractive, I think, financially and bureaucratically to attract people there. So,
they were chasing people down the streets if you got on the elevator.
Is that right?
Oh yeah, it was brutal in Australia as well.
Yeah.
So, I think the problem you're expressing about labor, particularly in restaurants, is we're feeling it here in a really bad way. I mean, the level of service has plummeted, and the quality
prices have gone up,
and the prices have gone way up. Yeah. Same in New Zealand.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting that the post-COVID world would do that. I would think that everybody wants to go back to work and get back to their normal life. But I don't know.
I think people have just had time to think more and reassess and I don't want to do that anymore. And,
I think
and
that's
people
true.
are moving out of sort of hospitality to more sort of office-based jobs.
Yeah.
And it's a challenge. But, we also have, we're a million miles from anywhere, really.
Yeah, right.
In the grand
That's
scheme
true.
of things, so
Which
is lovely, but it's it has its challenges too.
We're going to go to dinner tonight with my wife. It's her birthday today, and we're going to go somewhere, and we're probably going to go, wow, these people staying in business. No, we think it's going to be very good, but we certainly have seen the quality of service, and I think you're right. I think people have reassessed what they're doing. what I was doing was too hard, or we've lulled ourselves into a different lifestyle that really isn't probably real. That in the long run, in the humanity, that if you're not working as hard as you should be working, that eventually something has to give.
Yeah, and right now, we have, as you know, we've had some, to put on top of this, some challenging weather events.
That's right.
Which we've had the last few years. We've had some pretty erratic weather, and when I'm originally from England, and I first moved to New Zealand, I thought, oh yeah, it's the new world. It's not like vintage variability like in France and Italy. Where you have, this is a really good vintage, super vintage, poor vintage. I thought, it's just all very consistent. But in New Zealand, because we are quite exposed to various winds, and we're in the middle of two big water masses. It is quite challenging now dealing with the effects of Mother Nature or climate change, as some people might.
Well, I think we can talk about that now. When I want to get a lay of the land for the listeners to understand how New Zealand's wine country looks and what it's doing, but let's address the climate change. I think most people would agree, that there's something going on. This is not a political show, so we don't talk about why it's like that. But I was reading a book the other day about Burgundy, and we've had these crazy weather things. We're going to talk about the floods in New Zealand. There's been hail and crazy erratic weather throughout the United States. And I'm reading this book about the 40s, and Burgundy had this frost like in June, and it ruined the crops. And so they had this miserable vintage in 1940 because a frost came, and there was a frost in 2021, but it was in May. So they actually recovered from it. But I'm thinking, okay, this is 1940. This is long before all these chit-chat about, the reason for climate change. And I think sometimes, we don't look at the history of stuff and go, wow, yeah, maybe this is it. I mean, there was that mini ice age that occurred in the late 1700s. Madame Clicquot had problems with her vineyards for like 15 years. So I don't know how you not roll that forward and say, well, maybe we're just passing through, but whatever. Sorry, that was a political statement, wasn't it? So tell me, for the listeners, let's talk about New Zealand and the two islands. Is it two islands or more?
It's sort of, pretty much the North and South Island.
North and South Island, right?
Yeah.
And starting from the north of the North Island.
Yeah, Northland. It's sort of the first wine region of New Zealand.
It is, the first wine region.
And it's sort of, the wine industry sort of started off in Northland. There's only maybe 2 or 3 wineries up there now. Very sort of tropical, humid climate. I mean, that's the beautiful thing about New Zealand. We've got this really sort of broad latitudinal shift of from the tropical north to the not quite polar south, but you're Antarctica
and everything in between,
just down the road. Yeah, exactly.
So what are they?
So we've got Northland.
What do they grow up there?
They have a few sort of Merlot, Cabernet Franc. There's some Chamboussan.
Really,
probably the only Chamboussan up there. Yeah. Chardonnay.
But Bordeaux varietals too, huh?
A little bit. My friend has like Semillon, Albrino, Petit Mansang, and
really
all sorts of random stuff. It's pretty cool. It's sort of in the Bay of Islands, which is a beautiful place to visit, very touristy, but stunning. And then you come sort of down to Auckland, which is sort of the home of, the start of really traditional sort of wine growing. The Dalmatians came over from Yugoslavia, and
really, wow.
They wanted to grow grapes for their just consume themselves. You have a lot of the history of winemaking sort of goes back to the Dalmatians in Auckland, and now we've sort of, with the spread of the Auckland city, those vineyards are sort of getting quite compromised now with urban sprawl. But got some pretty famous Chardonnay producers up there, which is pretty cool. And then just off the Auckland City, there's a little island called Waiheke Island.
Oh yeah, Waiheke, yeah.
Yeah, so that's sort of like maybe the third island, but it's sort of population of about 9,000 people, swells to about 30, 40,000 in summer.
Really?
Normally.
Wow.
And, they're growing amazing Syrah up there.
Really?
Bordeaux varietals and, Chardonnay, a little bit of Pinot Gris and Sauvignon. But really, Waiheke for me is Syrah. It's a Syrah island and Bordeaux varietals, and then you're sort of coming down the east coast. You got Gisborne. It was traditionally very. It was a big grape sort of. A lot of Chardonnay was grown for some bigger companies for like sparkling base. And then it was one of the first ever biodynamic wineries was started in Gisborne. It's called Milton. Yeah.
So how far down the island are we at this point?
Sort of like pretty much coming towards sort of 2/3 of the way down the island on the coast.
We're getting down there.
Yeah, this is Gisborne, great surfing.
Right.
And
it is. Okay, cool.
Yeah, and then down from there is the Hawke's Bay. So sort of, and that's really great region for the Bordeaux varietal, Chardonnay, some Syrah as well. And that's sort of Gisborne and Hawke's Bay are really where they've really taken the brunt of Cyclone Gabrielle. Yeah, it's been terrible, absolutely. And everyone, I've been in touch with a lot of people while I've been away saying, it's 10 times worse than what you see on the TV and what you see in the
really
press.
The floods are that bad. I mean, I just saw a couple of shots where the silt had just basically engulfed in almost 2-3 feet of this stuff.
Yeah, just like the vineyards are just like little walls of where the grapes are. It's just silt walls essentially, and wineries of it's the floodwater's gone right up to the roof.
Wow.
There's a lot of different parts of different rivers converging and from the bay there in Hawke's Bay. So it's been pretty brutal. Getting ready to pick Chardonnay and other things probably in the next sort of 2
Has
to 3
there ever
weeks.
been a climate event like that in the past?
Yeah, down there's this cyclone Bola. I think I'm not quite sure when that was, but it was sort of really hit a lot of crops in Gisborne. Cyclone Bola, I think, could have been as early as the 80s, I think. But it's there's a lot of discussion now about. And it's gone very political very quickly about where things should be planted and where flood defences and things like that. And so it's Napier, which is the sort of Art Deco capital of sort of New Zealand, is the main city within Hawke's Bay, and that's had massive earthquakes as well. So they've really had
beat up.
Yeah, over the years, but make some stunning wines, really. Yeah.
We don't see a lot of Hawke's Bay stuff. I mean, there's some, but particularly in Northland, we don't see. I don't think I've ever tasted one from there.
Well, funnily enough, I was with Paige, my importer.
Yes.
We're pretty fanatical about coffee in New Zealand. So I was like, I need a good coffee. And so she said, I'll take you to this coffee shop. And this was on Monday, and went there. It was a really cool sort of coffee shop, and I'm going to get a good coffee here. And there's a little wine list, and there was like 3 wines from Northland on there.
Wow, that's crazy.
This is in Irvine,
Orange County. You can talk to me.
Costa Mesa, yeah. So it's like Northland Pinot Gris, Rosé, and it's like, wow,
that's crazy.
That's cool. Yeah. So, but yeah, I think we're in a country which has sort of seen New Zealand for maybe one thing, maybe 2, and I think it's, as I said, we haven't even got to the South Island yet.
Yeah,
but
right.
Diverse from a diversification perspective, New Zealand can do way more than Sauvignon Blanc and Pinot Noir, and because we do have this tropical north down to the south and everything in between, we can do great sparkling, Method Traditional, great aromatics, Riesling, Pinot Gris, world-class Pinot from various different terroirs. You've got Nelson, North Canterbury, Marlborough, Central Otago, and Syrahs to rival Northern Rhone, and Bordeaux blends to rival the best from Bordeaux.
Yeah, that's the new world, baby. We got it going on. So before we finish the North Island, what are some of the, I'm not going to say luxury, what are some of the lifestyle preferences of the New Zealand in general? Like you said, good coffee, we're a fanatic. Obviously wine, there's sort of a lifestyle part of being a New Zealander, a Kiwi, as it were, that would set you
totally at the outdoors. I mean, it's stunning.
The outdoors, yeah.
Yeah, you know, whether you're diving for crayfish or fishing in the Marlborough Sands, or in lockdown, we couldn't really get any seafood.
Seafood, right?
Yeah, and we were like desperate, so we would just go wait till low tide and then just go and get the cockles.
Wow, really? Yeah,
the clams.
Yeah.
And then we were like, God, we hadn't had like seafood for like 6 weeks, and they just tasted so good.
Oh, so good.
Yeah, just steam them and that's it. So yeah, I like New Zealand. It's a relatively simple life based on good principles, fresh air, family, socializing, good
That's
produce.
Great.
It's
we could use a little of all of that.
Yeah, and
here in America.
Sometimes it's nice to have a couple of days in LA too. Don't get me wrong.
That's right. Well, that's funny because.
But I must say, sorry, go on.
It's more than just Lord of the Rings, I guess.
Yeah, I think most of that was shot in LA, wasn't it? In the studio around the corner.
I don't know, but I had a full mural. It was a roadside, full size banner for a freeway sign that somebody had given me. It's huge. I had might have fit on this wall. And I had a winemaker from New Zealand, and what was his name? You probably know who he is. This is years ago. And he goes, I went there, and I took my kid, and we put on the costumes, and we did dual swords, at the same time.
Yeah.
And he was a New Zealander. He was like, this is so fun.
Yeah.
So
it's, the scenery is spectacular.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
It really is.
So now we're at the southern end of the North Island. We're going to end up in Martinborough. Is that where we're at now?
We got Martinborough. Yeah. That's very amazing Pinot Noir. Slightly cooler climate, and they've had some pretty cool and small vintages, so it's sometimes can be a little bit marginal. But when it's I guess it's like Burgundy and Pinot Noir. It's growing grapes on on the margins, and that's sometimes where you can get the greatest.
It's amazing stuff.
Yeah.
And they are dramatically different than the Marlborough versions.
Yep.
Which is so fascinating because how wide is the isthmus between the two islands?
Well, it takes, as a sort of crow flies, you can get on a plane in 15 minutes sometimes from the South Island to the North Island, so Picton to Wellington, or 3.5, 4 hours going through the sort of the sounds.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah. So, it's very
But they're
close.
Connected?
No.
So, but how wide would that?
Cook
you
Strait
swim it?
Some people have swum the Cook Strait.
Okay.
Yeah. I wouldn't. There's a few sharks for sure. And pretty cold water. But and then you're over into Marlborough.
Which is fascinating to me that it's just one's the south side of the North Island, one's the north side of the South Island, and they have dramatically different wine character. And particularly when you're talking about Pinot Noir, which has such a conduit to where it's being grown and what you're sensing from it. I think that's really fascinating.
Yeah, and where we are at Seresin, we're sort of Marlborough's sort of probably roughly pushing on 30,000 hectares now in the vine, and there's sort of three distinct valleys. There's the sort of Awateri Valley, which is the slightly to the southeast, which is slightly cooler. And then you've got the Wairau Valley, which is sort of on the Wairau sort of valley floor. The Wairau is the river, Wairau River that runs out into the bay, Cloudy Bay. And then off there, you've got the sort of southern valleys, and that's sort of going up into the hills. And that's where we think, clay-based soils up there, slopes, 99% of Marlborough's pretty much on the flats. So those clay-based slopes are where Pinot and Chardonnay really, really thrive. Yeah.
We're in Martinborough now, and then we're gonna go to Marlborough. And the personality of Marlborough, both Pinot Noir and Sauvignon Blanc, but Sauvignon Blanc in particular is that cat pea, sort of really green, very veggie, sometimes overdone. Sauvignon Blanc.
Yeah, I think that's stereotypical. It's not necessarily.
That's what I'm asking.
Okay, yeah, it's not necessarily that.
Try to shed that.
Yeah, definitely. It's you got to look at the subregions and the soil, and the temperatures, and also the yields.
Yes.
So you sort of get more the down in the lower Wairau, sort of more alluvial soils, heavier soils, quite fertile along the riverbanks. A lot more sort of we call thiols or sweaty armpit sort of.
That's great. That's a great character.
Elements.
We all look for that.
And, the yields are, sometimes, 16, 18, 20 tons per hectare. So
wow.
But, Sauvignon can
That's pretty substantial.
Yeah, Sauvignon can make pretty good wines.
Yeah.
Relatively at a young vine age, and it also relatively high. And then you're sort of going down into the Awet tree, a little bit more cool. You sort of get more that tomato leaf, black currant even characteristics. And then, Southern Valleys, sort of Wire is probably a little bit more, less tropical, a little bit more, I'd say, restrained. And that's something what you'll find with the Seresin wines. Right. Absolutely.
So do you think that evolved from, like you said, the yields, these, let's call it, put it in American terms, 5,000-7,000 tons an acre. Do you think that character was brought out from trying to create too much wine at one time, or that we think that maybe the wine consumer was looking for this idea? Because I get so many, and it's almost to the point where they're so overdone in that character that I almost feel like maybe people are looking for this. And then I see a wonderful restrained wines like the ones you make, where you start to taste the grape, you start to feel the terroir, you start to get a sense of where it's from.
I think it's, it's like anything in anywhere in the world. There's heavily oaked, extracted Cabernet from the Napa Valley floor, and then you go up to Diamond Mountain with altitude, and you're getting a lot more restraint and elegance. Oh, I shouldn't really be talking about American wines to you guys in California.
Well, I have my opinions all the way around the world, so don't worry about that.
So, yeah, I think, there's some people who just want a hard day at work, come home to the terrace, get to the fridge, crack open the screw cap and pour a glass of Sauvignon Blanc, sit outside and just have a, it's quite an exhilarating, it can be quite an exhilarating
smack
beverage.
In the face,
yeah,
really.
Exactly. And, and then there's some people who want to, we've just been having some wonderful oysters on this trip, and, the sort of the Seresin Estate Sauvignon, it really, when you've got that salty, briny oyster, you don't want to have a tropical, sweaty armpit overload, because that oyster is just going to disappear. But with this, it's a lovely sort of match that complements. So some people eat and drink together, and some people just want to just have a good drink. And at the end of the day, I think when you look at it overall, we make really bugger all wine in comparison to the global world of wine.
Yeah,
but we have one of the largest voices, and I think it's really cool for New Zealand being such 5 million people. We have a world-class rugby team. We've got world-class wines. I just think we have got to start moving away from just this sort of one, two-dimensional perspective and style of wines that we're making, because we are, as I was saying, do a phenomenal amount of wonderful other wines.
You want to be able to express yourself, what's going on in your country at the time that's going on, and what the flavors are that you're producing. And I'm sure your wife would love to make sure that this is an expression of that time and that place, rather than, let's call it formula wines, where coming out of New Zealand, there's a clear and obvious set of wines that are just trying to be that because that's what they think they are, and they're sort of making them that way. And I find them hard to differentiate amongst each other. Once they get to such an opulent position of those character traits, you're kind of going, all right.
Yeah.
And here we have something that's sort of expressive of what we're trying to do.
Yeah, and I think, our owner, Michael Seresin, he understands, his inspiration was very much the old world. Italy was the inspiration, where wine is part of a bigger cultural piece. It's about food, it's about art, it's about conversation and music, and you see wine as in that context, and farming as well. It's not just a cash crop, whereas probably some of the growers now is just like, I can get X thousand tons for my grapes, and I'm just, they're not that I don't have a brand or anything.
Right, yeah.
Constellation. Our mates here in the USA calling, we want to put it in our, 2 million case brand, but that's getting Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc out to a lot of people, So, it's, everyone needs everyone. And, obviously everyone knows Cloudy Bay and what they did for
that's the classic example.
Yeah.
Right?
For the region is phenomenal.
Well, you need those unfortunately, and I have this pet peeve about the stuff we have on the shelf at our markets, but you need those, So my dad was traveling to Napa in 1974. He stopped at Sutter Home, had a glass of pink wine with Bob Trincaro, and it became the famed White Zinfandel that we needed to bring people to the table that weren't drinking wines. And I suppose that the stuff we see in the market today are that, until one day they taste a wine like yours and they go, seems to be something more to this. And I have this. I have two questions. One is, can you buy a cork in New Zealand? Are you allowed to use a cork? Because I don't think I've seen a cork finished wine from New Zealand for 10 years.
Yeah. There's a few. There's a few in the local museum at Brayshaw Park in Marlborough. No, there are a few. Certainly, some of the Bordeaux blend producers and Syrah producers, and there's a few, but very, very, very rare now. And you'll get like $100, $150 Pinots in screw cap. It's not an issue.
Yeah. So what have they done? Well, look, I'm going way back because I actually was going to invest in a company that made the original foam cork, which was actually being used by Coca-Cola in the 80s, and they were manufactured right here in L.A. And it was, once Taylor Cellars closed, or as Coca-Cola sold it, they stopped making the cork, and then it came back in a different fashion. They were inferior to what had already been created. But at that time, they were talking about studies, and I've tasted wines side by side, wines bottled in cork, the same juice bottled by screw caps. What have they found in New Zealand when they bottled a $150 Pinot Noir in a screw cap?
I think it probably just ages consistently. It's slower but consistent,
right.
So it doesn't have that variability.
Yeah,
essentially,
that's a problem.
Essentially, at the end of the day, and you go to Burgundy, look how many people are, how many you got corked wines.
Yeah, I know.
and then wax on top of that, because I don't even think the cork and the capsule is good enough. They need to put wax on there as well. It's not just for aesthetics. And so I think, New Zealand, Australia, we just got pretty sick and tired of just getting shitty corks from Portugal. And it's like, well, we need to do something about this. And it's been, it's sort of, we have a natural acidity and vibrancy in New Zealand wines. And so I think, it sort of allows the wine to retain that regardless of varietal.
So the original caps had trouble with any kind of oxygen permeation, so that nothing would happen.
Yeah.
Then they made some adjustments to it, during research, and now you've got a little bit of airflow that, oxygen gets in there, so it has to advance the wine a little bit.
That's right, yeah. I think, sometimes you just got to look at some of your winemaking techniques. You don't want too much reduction.
Yeah, right.
It's sometimes nice with Chardonnay, but you don't really want reductive Pinots or Sauvignon Blanc. So, that's sort of above my pay grade. That's the wife's neck of the woods.
Yeah, that's right. I don't know about you, but when I go home from work, we continue to talk about work. We continue to talk about orders or sales or whatever we're doing. But I have a more philosophical thing. Been reading a lot of books lately about the history of wine, and one of them is certainly when the Nazis came into France and cut it in half. And I started thinking about that and all the other things that have happened throughout the world, and sort of the definition of old world versus new world, right? So we talk about new world just because of the age. A lot of people will refer to it just as an age. California, the U.S., North America, South America, New Zealand, Australia. Then some people will refer to it as a style, right? Like I've gotten Bordeaux's that come in. I go, that's kind of a new world Bordeaux, even though we know it's from, who knows how, 12th century wine history. But then I start thinking, and this is not a criticism from North America or New Zealand or Australia or anything else. It's just I think a fact of, doesn't all this history of all these things that have happened throughout the wine culture, let's just take World War II, for example. World War I devastated many, many vineyards in Champagne they still can't plant. Apparently Attila the Hun even waged war in Champagne. Wouldn't all those events against humanity, so to speak, roll up to a perspective, an outlook, a point of view of winemakers and families that are in this business that could help us understand what old world might mean. Like they have all this wonderful history we don't have together. Together, you and I don't have the history, the two countries that they would have in other parts of the world. And I kind of want to feel like that their emotional outset when it comes to wine is just different because of this history of. You think that's a part of the definition?
I think also culturally in how wine is, or alcohol is enjoyed or consumed as well. And I think you sort of, look at the older world and wine is like I was saying before, like an integral part of society. And
right.
just, every day, and you still go to Italy today and I remember being on a beach about 5 years ago in Sicily on a beach. My wife made wine there for many years, and there was these group of boys standing in the shallows on the beach. They must have been 21, 22, 23, and I said, God, they're having a heated discussion. What are they talking about? And they said, they were just arguing how they're going to cook the zucchini tonight. And this was like 11 o'clock in the morning,
okay, That's hilarious.
And that's a sort of passion around, and, they're not going to be, sitting around having a Coca-Cola with their, zucchini fritti or whatever. So I think it's also part of, how wine and food culturally sort of fit together. And I think in New Zealand, well, you've had prohibition here.
Yeah, right.
Which
still have, by the way.
Yeah, still suffering effects from that. And even in New Zealand, it was sort of, we used to have this, pubs used to open like for an hour or two. People just get drunk as quickly as possible and then have to go home to their wives and get a talking to. And I think, that's sort of more than, these things are sort of more than you.
Is that a worldwide thing? We get a talking to? Does that happen all over?
I'm not sure. I couldn't comment.
I think
but you
just got married, right? So almost. You're getting married.
Yeah, in Italy.
So you got that to look forward to.
So, but it's a really good point, and there's probably an MW research paper out there to be done or already done about this, But I think New World there's an element of style because, as you say, some of the Bordeaux's from the class growth to making very polished, very fruit forward New World style of wines because I guess people enjoy that style now, and the Australians and the Californians have brought that style of wine to the consumer who like, oh yeah, I like this, and actually I don't need to know the village name, it just says Cabernet Merlot on it.
Yeah, right. That's right. I think that culturally it's a very important part as the points you make, but I think that the flavor profile of wines that come and go, it's kind of like, why would Sancerre be so popular right now? It's like, I've never heard. I went to a restaurant with my cousin, he ordered a Sancerre. I'm like, we don't even know what Sancerre is. But it's just a popular drink now, and that's going to ebb and flow as well as styles, New World Bordeaux versus Old World Bordeaux. And I'm wondering if we take that hundreds of years of culture, because I was talking to the winemaker Louis Jadot, sitting in the same chair you are, and he was talking about basically how he just considered himself a steward of the land, and I think most winemakers do, right? We're not going to be here forever. A good winemaker gets 40 or 50 vintages under their belt, and that they're done with their career. So you've got plenty more after you. And I'm wondering now, what happens to the New World wines? Like you're organic and biodynamic. We'll talk about that right now. Maybe that's the legacy that the New World group is starting to produce, and they will build on that history, and they will continue. So in 100 years or 200 years now, the wine drinkers will say, yeah, we have this cultural history for organic and biodynamic wines that was ahead of the curve at the time, and we've been playing with it longer. Mm-hmm. Because if you ask somebody about Chateau Lafite or Margaux or Haut-Brion becoming biodynamic, you're talking a foreign language. They're not going to do that soon. They probably should, but they're not going to. Tell me about how Seresin became organic, and right. Was that out of the chutes that they wanted to do this?
Yeah, it was Michael's philosophy. It's like, and looking at some of the greatest wines that are made out there, actually a lot of them don't scream about it, but DRC, Laflave, Loire, they're all biodynamic. There's, I think, Louis Roederer Champagne is biodynamic, Ponte Canet and Bordeaux. So a lot out there are doing this. And I guess you go talking about your history of grape growing. I mean, people have been grape growing for hundreds and hundreds of years without Monsanto supplying, Roundup and glyphosate.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
This is just farming.
Yeah.
So we're just doing farming as without any additives or chemicals, and that's been a relatively new thing. And it's obviously commercially or conventionally grown grapes all over the world, and it's all about yield and crop, and not necessarily looking at the 200 years and how's our soil going to be in 200 years. Right. But at Seresin, it was sort of Michael's philosophy was very much that this is best for quality wine and best for the earth. So
this is my analogy. I just was telling staff why you were waiting. Wines have typically and generally been dry wines. Almost all wines, Bordeaux, certainly the old days, Burgundy, the old days, is all dry. And of course, if you're talking about a sweet wine like a Moscato or something, okay, they're going to be sweet, but generally they're dry, right?
Yeah.
The profile's always been dry. Well, then the humans add sugar to them, put them on the market shelf, and they drink this stuff because they like it, and it's fat and fluffy, and everybody likes to drink those wines. But then we turn around and we start touting dry wines again as if it's something new. Like, they put it on the label now, with zero sugar and zero, lower carbs. I'm like, wait a minute, it always was like that.
Yeah.
And same with organic farming, biodynamic, a little bit different. There's Rudolf Steiner's book right there. You'll notice that the binding is not broken, which means I haven't started reading it yet. But what was there before the copper sulfate's been around a little bit, but what was going on before that?
Well,
organic.
Yeah,
had to be.
Exactly. And sometimes the wines tasted pretty crap. Back in the day, because there's a lot of technology has evolved as well.
Sure.
We still embrace technology where possible to do mechanize some of the things that we do in the vineyard. And we're 52 hectares, so we're the largest biodynamic estate in New Zealand.
Wow.
And
why do you go biodynamic? I mean, that's taken.
I guess it's sort of like trying to explore and take it to the next level.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's not just looking at intensive farming because 52 hectares, but the property is 80 hectares. We have to have a certain amount for fallow land. We have 500 odd olive trees. We make organic and biodynamic olive oil. Pine nut trees. We have the bees. We have gardens for the staff, and we make our own the biodynamic preparations, and grow our chamomile and valerian and dandelion. So it's again looking, you go to agriturismo in Italy, you go there, you stay in the farmhouse.
Yeah, right.
Someone's cooking you food from the garden there, and you're drinking the wine from the vines that have just been grown there, and the wine's maybe made in the garage underneath the house, and it's just that whole thing. It's beautiful, and it just tastes. It's just good, and I think that's not necessarily the philosophy in New Zealand really at all. But there are some pioneering producers. I think there's about six biodynamic properties now in New Zealand. They've been doing it for quite a long time, and you look at the wines that they make, and they're always like, I want the Felton Road Pinot Noir, I want the Ripon Pinot Noir, or they're always right up there in the top sort of classification of wines from New Zealand, because there is a vibrancy, a luminosity of intensity of wines made in that manner.
It's not an excuse to make a wine that tastes like kombucha, which is what's, I think, tasting all these wines. In fact, let me ask this question, because I taste wines every Tuesday for the last 35 years. Oh my
Why
God.
a Tuesday?
It's a long time.
Why on a Tuesday?
That's a good question. Well, you see the picture of my dad there. Right behind that door was a loft, and I would set up on Tuesdays. I'd go up the loft, and I'd set up the tastings for his favorite clients and the doctors that supported his pharmacies. And so that was the tasting panel on Tuesday. And so that's just what he did. And so when I bought the company from him in 1988, he goes, you already know this, but we taste on Tuesdays. So I taste on Tuesdays. I never missed a Tuesday unless I was sick or out of town. So I've been doing it for 35 years.
And that's going back to culturally, that was how it was. And that was your ritual.
That's true. That was part of you're right. That's a good point. That was part of the culture of what we were doing. It was part of my indoctrination into wine. But in the case of biodynamic farming, which is organic on steroids, so to speak, as Katrina Fry said, which I thought was fabulous.
I'm not sure about the word steroid though.
Well, I mean, not chemically steroids.
It's got a negative connotation.
I meant. What did she say? She said something else. Actually, she said the next level or the golden version. I forgot. She used a great term, but taking organic to the next level, and I think it's a great thing. I think it's important. I think of all the industries in the world that make things or do things, that wine is probably the most responsible to become organic and biodynamic and sustainable in its practices, because it has so much impact on everything.
I think also we have to have a pragmatism of not always let the philosophy dictate quality, because we need to make a good quality wine at the end of the day.
That's what it is.
Absolutely, and whether it's, as I said before, some of the French great producers, they don't write biodynamic on their back labels because they don't have back labels, or they don't put it on the front. It's just that's the way their wines are.
That's the way they did it.
And a lot of consumers just don't know. But it's like, wow, that's a tasty drop. So yeah, it's I think it's always a hot topic of conversation. But I think we feel comfortable that we're making a wine of provenance from our site, and really doing the bare minimum, trying to just...
I think wouldn't that be what wine is to be? And it was put to me once by a young winemaker: what other product can I take halfway around the world, plop on the table, say this is who we were and when we were, this is who we are and when we were? And so if that's really the goal of the winemaker, is to produce a wine that represents the sense of time and place, that's what it does. And so that should create some kind of connection. And I think to define this is very hard, and I've not heard a definition as to why wine is that product, when you don't feel that way about organic carrots, you don't feel that way about Maui Blanc, the white wine from Maui that's made of pineapples. That doesn't stimulate these conversations or these processes, and nobody goes home to have a scotch to start, besides feeling numb, to have what wine does to you when you have a glass. And I went home last night, my wife's working on a charity, there are 4 women at the table. What would you like? A glass of wine. And so there's something about wine, grapes, and its connection to the earth that does something to the soul, in my opinion. And I think that's the winemaker's job, is to bring that out. And that doesn't include playing with mega purple and all the other crap they put in it.
And I think people come into wine from different perspectives. My wife certainly was quite science. I said, how do you get into wine? She went to wine university. She said, I wanted to use my science sort of bent side of my brain and travel. I wanted to see the world. Perfect. For me, I like geography and geology. I love travel, and I love eating and drinking, and that's sort of
you found the right place.
my perspective, and also I guess also everyone who's met in the wine industry generally loves socializing, likes meeting new people, seeing new places, doing this, and I think it's we're very lucky to be in an industry that is sociable, and 3 years we've been sort of kept apart, but now it's good to get out there and meet people, and while I've been in the US, the level of interest and knowledge of just the consumer or the wine director or the buyer or the importer, and the level of knowledge and interest is phenomenal. I think it's wine as a part of society here in the US it's phenomenal. You go to these restaurants and there's a wine director, a senior somm, junior somm.
Yeah, well, those jobs are drying up. Let me tell you that.
And it's just like, wow, and everyone's just happy, and it's just so positive.
You open a can of worms there. Those jobs used to be very plentiful. Like in Vegas, you get a 6-digit job because you're the somm, the head somm, and now it's like the GM is the somm, and a line cook is the somm, and it's just like we were talking about, the labor pool has just changed so much, and the margins are terrible in the restaurant business right now, and they're not even that good in wine in general. But yeah, that's a big issue. You're right. The culture of wine in America is growing. I like to think that this show has something to do. Obviously, that doesn't move the needle in the world of all the people in America, but it certainly moves the needle for some people to hear your conversation about what you think and what's going on in New Zealand. I think it's important. And I have this idea that I'm working on, which is to tell these stories, but way even more philosophical and even more culturally than we've seen in the past. And so I'm working on telling those stories in a different format that people can understand how much impact wine has had on culture throughout the centuries, really. I mean, wine is like 8,000 years old.
Phenomenal, yeah.
They found a winery in Armenia, which I'm Armenian, that there were shoes, there were still sandals there, and the amphora were there, and they dated back 6,000 years.
And now, guess what? We're making wine in amphora again.
Yeah, that's fascinating too. Are you doing that there?
Yeah, we've got a.
Why? What's sort of the idea?
Again, it's just it's progression.
I suppose. Back to what's old is new again.
Yeah, exactly. And it's sort of like I think you've got to have the right. You have the right grapes for this sort of thing, and we have beautiful biodynamic Pinot Noir. And it's really, we do a 100% amphora, fermented and aged Pinot Noir with 0 sulfur. So it is quintessential Pinot Noir. It's high toned, it's vibrant, it's delicious. There's no oak. Masking this delicate, beautiful grape, and it's stunning. Yeah, have it slightly chilled, but it has a real vibrancy to it. It's just essence of Pinot Noir. We do the same with some Syrah there as well. A little bit of Syrah we've planted, and I think it's. I guess it's also like chefs as well. They always want to look at new things, innovate, and try and challenge themselves. And I think winemakers are like that. And if you've got a really good raw ingredient, you can just have a really beautiful organically grown tomato and you can just eat it. You can do that for 25 years, but sometimes you might want to do something different with that tomato, and
So I think that those ideas are to still continue to produce the best wine they can produce from what they're given, and use those methods to sort of accentuate, draw out, whatever word we want to use, what that grape has got, as opposed to flavoring the wine because we're going to put too much oak in it, which we're always all against. But flavoring the wine is one thing, bringing out the best the grape has is another, and that's going to come from things like amphora that oxygenate the wine a little bit during the process, or whatever the reason is. Now they're using concrete eggs all over the place, and
we've looked at
it's so fascinating.
And we're not doing our total production. Our core production on this beautiful clay slope that we have is more traditional French oak, minimal amount, and resting and aging in barrel. But I think it's nice to also maybe look at a slightly different audience as well. These wines are sort of talking to different parts of the wine community sometimes. So it's exciting. It really is.
I have this bizarre question that I ask. We're actually almost out of time. But here's the question. It prompts all kinds of crazy responses, because the objective of the question is to see in its root fashion, in its grassroots, what wine could be. And the question is this: what would happen if profitability was not part of this equation? In other words, if we're making wine not for profit, but because we were just going to produce the best we can produce, and we don't care. And in fact, let me just highlight this. During a meeting of the Burgundians, when they were creating some of the appellations in modern times, one of the winemakers said, we shouldn't allow advertising of our wines from this appellation, because we're going to produce the best we can produce, and people are going to want to drink our wines, and they're going to come buy them from us because they're good. Like, oh, okay, that's an interesting thought. So if we don't put profitability, and you don't have to fly across America, and stop in New York and hand sell a bottle of wine to somebody, what happens to the wine?
Yeah, I think we were talking about that today. I think it's hard to make a profit when you're.
It's very hard. It's a very tough business.
When you're an artisanal winemaker, like many people are in New Zealand. And so some are saying, hey, it's very different to the Burgundy model, where grandfather gives his 10 hectares to his to his two sons, and they have 5 hectares each, and then they give it down to their son. And the land that now it's worth is like $1 million per hectare or whatever. We don't have that.
You wish it was only $1 million per hectare.
Yeah, well, exactly. And we don't have that. So it's the next generation. We're still like 30 years, our wine industry. And, they say what we've done in 30 years, it took Burgundy 300 years to do. And I think there's an element of that, because it is the go-getting attitude of the new world Kiwis, Aussies. Let's just go out there unburdened by rules and regulations to some extent. But still, all of our great winemakers have all traveled the world and been to Burgundy and Sonoma, made wines, and we have great Burgundian winemakers come to Seresin and made wine and learnt from us, and that's a wonderful exchange of experience and knowledge. But I think that is the bigger are getting bigger, and more profitable, but that's not great for the consumer. And it isn't. You see it in the US, very much in the Sauvignon Blanc category, and you look at all the cheap wines, and they're all owned by big corporations, where they're pretty much New Zealand's part of a bigger offering, which is very, very different to the artisan winemakers like Seresin and
the way it works now in America is not unlike salad dressing or toothpaste. There's a reason why there's certain wines that are front and center, and that when you turn your head, there's this particular bank of wines. It's the old guerrilla marketing from Gallo. They would move their wines into the position for the consumer to see. And what's really disappointing for me, particularly with imports, is that when you look on the other side of the aisle at the supermarket and you look at the imports, it's the worst representation of imported wines there possibly could be. It's the root level Burgundies, it's the root level Chiantis, it's the root level, the corporate Sauvignon Blancs from New Zealand. It's bad for the consumer, and that's what we want to change. But he said something interesting, and I turn the tables on it, because we have the new world, defined by, and since we talked about it already, by the fact that we can do whatever we want. We have no shackles. We can plant whatever we want, wherever we want, and process it the way we want to. And you can't do that in most of the old world. And I envy that to a certain extent, because the French, for instance, protect their butter regionally. They protect their cheeses regionally. And they have this wonderful old character that you just know that, like, if you want Roquefort cheese, you're going to get Roquefort cheese because that's protected by the Roquefort code. And here we are like, I don't know what I'm going to get. I mean, if I buy a box of cheeses, I want to make sure it's the kind of cheeses I like. No, I'm kidding. So I envy that to a certain extent, but at the same time, there's a certain, on the flip side, the old world winemakers love the fact that they can just play.
Yeah, I'm totally with
Chefs
you.
too. Right?
Yeah, totally with you. Yeah, and I think obviously the US have really progressed with their AVAs, just mapping the geographical indications. It's been fantastic, and I think in New Zealand we've been talking about some things like this for quite some time now. So I just think here in the US there's a lot more to New Zealand wine than you consumers actually see, and we've been to 3 or 4 fantastic wine retailers in down from Laguna Beach up to here, and everyone's like, "What else have you got? What are you doing? I want to sell more expensive New Zealand wine. Give me more Pinot. Great. Give me this. Give me," and it's just been wonderful.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, because they're the gatekeepers. Because they can get those out, and yourself, you can get those wines out to your
get them drinking it.
Yeah,
and let them share with a friend and say, "Whoa." A gentleman came in yesterday. He goes, "That's way to go, Paul. You send me a Bordeaux, and then I call to get more, and you're out of it. What kind of shenanigans are you running over here?" And this is an older gentleman who's been coming here for years, tasting wine on Saturdays, and we really struck a chord with this Medoc, and I was so proud of that. And I actually found him 4 bottles, so I didn't feel so bad. But that's when you feel like you've helped somebody understand what we're doing.
Absolutely.
So,
and we're not saving lives, but
no, you don't know that.
We're bringing a lot of joy, I think. And
you don't know that.
Well, yeah.
There are a lot of people that say, "I got to have a glass of wine now, I'm going to die." Anyway, we're at 51 minutes. It's been a real pleasure having you here, Simon. I think this,
you too. It's fantastic, and love your work.
Conversation. Thank you. Yeah. And I bon voyage, safe travels home, and I think you're just going right to the airport from here.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
That's incredible. And I hope it was successful and that the Americans treated you properly.
Oh, very much so. Wonderful. I love the passion and energy and just positivity of Americans. It's wonderful.
You know, your accent, is confusing to me and I had a woman here named Leah Pravetta. She is a Burgundian, born there, works in South Africa, but lives in London.
Okay.
So imagine that accent. I mean, that was very confusing to figure out. Well, cheers. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Cheers.
Take care.